Good afternoon. We're calling this legislative hearing to order. Before we begin our discussion of the Native Children's Commission Implementation Act, I just want to acknowledge the passing of one of the real leaders here in the Congress when it came to matters before this committee, the Indian Affairs Committee, but a Native leader, Senator Ben Nighthorse Campbell, who recently passed. I think Senator Campbell and I served on the committee for the full time that he was here. I was also serving at that same time, and just recognize the contributions that he has made on so many important initiatives related to America's indigenous people, and the first Native American to serve in the United States Senate. So we respect his memory and his honor. As I mentioned, we are here today to examine Title II of my Native Children's Commission Implementation Act discussion draft, the title of the bill that's focused on justice and safety for Native children, youth, and families. This committee has built a strong record documenting the serious public safety challenges across Indian country, especially the persistent gaps in law enforcement. We'll continue that important work, and it's just as important that we focus on the resources that communities need before law enforcement becomes involved, and to support families and victims after that involvement occurs. Those moments matter. If families do not have access to coordinated community-based services, they are far more likely to cycle deeper into the justice system instead of receiving the support that could prevent further harm. Title II aims to close those gaps by strengthening coordination, increasing flexibility in funding, and investing in prevention, particularly in the areas of juvenile justice, domestic violence, and cases among missing children. I released this discussion draft at the beginning of August, grounded in the recommendation of the Alice Spotted Bear and Walter Soboleff Native Children's Commission report, and since then we've gathered extensive feedback from tribes, tribal organizations, and Native Hawaiian organizations across the country and relevant federal agencies. As my staff and I have worked toward introducing this legislation, we're now refining the language and continuing to build the record around the programs and initiatives that the bill would support. One strong example of what this approach can look like is Tiwahi. This is a successful bipartisan initiative. Tiwahi means family in the Lakota and Dakota languages, and it's a coordinated service delivery model that allows tribes to build capacity and design locally tailored programs. These include family and social services, juvenile justice, recidivism reduction, substance use prevention and treatment, and improved case management. Last August, the committee held a roundtable in Alaska on this discussion draft, and we heard at that time from Vivian Corthius, who is the CEO of the Association of Village Council Presidents, AVCP. This is one of the first 6 pilot sites for Tiwahi back in 2015. And Vivian shared to the group how transformative Tiwahi has been for AVCP and the region it serves. It allowed AVCP to consolidate 26 separate departments into 6 divisions, along with 2 dedicated centers, a family service center and a tribal resource center. And these changes have made a real difference. They've improved collaboration and strengthened service delivery for the 56 federally recognized tribes that AVCP represents. Families seeking education, childcare, or employment and training services can now access those supports all in one place at AVCP's Family Service Center, instead of having to navigate multiple departments. Title II of the Native Children's Commission Implementation Act would codify Tiwahi and expand this model to tribes across the country. It would also establish a tribal advisory committee on juvenile justice, direct a study on the scope and context of cases involving missing Native children, codify the Alaska Native Victim Services Program at the Denali Commission, and provide permanent funding for tribal domestic violence coalitions, regional and national resource centers, and the Native Domestic Violence Hotline through the Family Violence Prevention and Services Act. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses today about the work that they do and about how Title II provisions would help them continue supporting their communities. So I thank you all for being here today. We know that traveling to Washington is never easy, and when we've got some icy weather out there, it makes it even harder. So we appreciate the time that you're giving us. I'll now turn to the Vice Chair for his opening statements.
Thank you, Chair Murkowski. I want to start by extending a warm aloha to Mark Patterson, a leader in the juvenile justice work in Hawaii and nationwide. Mark played a key role in transforming Hawaii's juvenile justice system, serving as administrator of the Kawailoa Youth and Family Wellness Center, formerly known as the Hawaii Youth Correctional Facility. During his tenure, Mark oversaw the reduction of youth incarceration by more than 80% over 15 years and helped to reduce the number of girls in detention to 0 in 2022. Mark also previously served on the Coordinating Council on Juvenile Justice and the Delinquency Prevention, and currently serves as the chair of the Hawaii Correctional System Oversight Commission. Mahalo, Mark, for your continued leadership and for your testimony today. Doing everything we can to ensure public safety in Indian country is just one of our trust and treaty obligations. So much of the public safety work this committee has done over the last several years has focused on addressing unmet public safety needs in Indian country. Last Congress, the committee held 5 public safety events, including a listening session joined by more than 600 individuals, allowing us to hear firsthand from tribal leaders, tribal organizations, and Native Hawaiian organizations about their community's unique needs, such as improving law enforcement officer recruitment and retention, strengthening victim services, addressing the MMIP crisis, and increasing resources for correctional facilities, construction, and maintenance, just to name a few. It is clear that we need to do more to address public safety. Today, we continue this work with a specific focus on children and on families. The Alice Spotted Bear and Walter Soboleff Commission's report includes extensive recommendations, which Chair Murkowski has converted into a potential legislative solution to discuss today. I'm glad bipartisan committee staff worked together to listen and learn from Native communities from across the country, including Hawaii, on how the draft legislation can support their unique public safety needs. So I want to thank, in particular, the Native Hawaiian organizations and individuals who share their juvenile justice expertise with our staffs over the last few months, starting with Mark Patterson, Sean Kanaiaupuni with Partners in Development Foundation, Allison Masutani with Malama Aina Foundation, Sanoi Marfil with In Peace, and Momi Okana with Keikioka Aina. Madam Chair, I'd like to enter 2 transcripts from our listening sessions on juvenile justice issues into the record.
Without objection.
Thank you to all of our witnesses, and I look forward to your testimony and learning about how this draft legislation can best support Native communities through culturally and community-driven juvenile justice solutions.
Thank you, Senator Schatzen, and pleased that you were able to have that listening session. Senator Daines, I know that you have one of the witnesses today that you would like to introduce, and any comments that you would care to make. Now is the appropriate time.
Great. Chair Murkowski, thank you. I'd like to welcome Councilwoman Joan Johnson from the Fort Belknap Indian community, who's made a long trek to be with us here today. We met earlier. I had a great discussion with both Senator Sheehy and myself about the great work they're doing and the tremendous outcomes they're seeing in reductions in recidivism, which is really amazing. The very much appreciating the work you're doing to impact the families, young people there in Fort Belknap. I appreciate her record of service and her willingness to testify on behalf of her tribe. Representing the Gros, Councilwoman Johnson was just recently elected to the Tribal Council. She has decades of experience serving the youth in her community and is an expert on the Tawani program. So when she speaks to the committee here today, this is not from academic research, it's from actually seeing what this does for the people in Indian country, particularly in Fort Belknap. Councilwoman, thank you for your work. We look forward to your testimony.
Thank you, Senator Daines. I will now introduce the rest of the panel. Mr. Patterson has been introduced by the Vice Chair. Thank you and welcome, Mr. Patterson. We have the Honorable Lonna Street, who is the Chairwoman for Spirit Lake Tribe in Fort Totten, North Dakota. We welcome you to the committee. The Councilwoman Johnson has just been introduced. Welcome. We're pleased that you are here. We have Ms. Anita Fineday, who is the former commissioner for the Alice Spotted Bear and Walter Soboleff Commission on Native Children. She was not able to make the travel today, but we have her participating virtually, so we're pleased that she is here. And then also in person is Ms. Lori Jump, who is the Executive Director for StrongHearts Native Helpline, based in Sault Ste. Marie. So welcome to all of you. I want to remind our witnesses that we do have your full written testimony, and it will be included as part of the official hearing record. We'd ask that you keep your oral remarks today to no more than 5 minutes so that we've got plenty of time to ask questions of you, and we will begin the witness statements with the Honorable Lonna Jackson Street. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's an honor to be here today to have the opportunity to provide testimony on behalf of these very important matters, that we're here to discuss today. And I also want to say thank you to Vice Chair and to members of the committee as well to have the opportunity to provide my testimony. My name is Lonna Jackson Street. I am the current chairwoman of the Spirit Lake Tribe in North Dakota. We come from north central North Dakota. We're part of the original 1867 treaty along with the Siston-Wapton Sioux tribe of Dakotas. And so it gives me great honor to speak on behalf of our people back at home. The Spirit Lake Tribe is a sovereign nation. And like I said, we're recognized by the 1867 treaty. The Spirit Lake Tribe is home to about 8,000 tribal members and 450 square miles of reservation lands, including the Devil's Lake waters, which is North Dakota's largest natural lake. Our lake is vital. It's a part of our traditional and cultural heritage, and it is essential for tourism, hospitality, and is the mainstay of our economy. Despite our efforts, we suffer poor health and reduced life expectancy. Poor infrastructure, high unemployment, and social and economic dislocation are major factors for us. Our homicide rate is 4 times higher than the non-Hispanic whites. Within this year, 5 murders occurred within our reservation boundaries, and this is far too many. To protect our children and families, we've developed our Tiwahe program, a community-based approach to provide caring family-type support for troubled youth and adults. Our Tiwahe program effectively marshals resources to provide better support for our youth and families, to improve employment opportunities, and to enhance social service support while reducing the need for foster care by keeping families intact. We also endorsed key recommendations of the Native Children's Commission study, including providing culturally relevant trauma care for our youth in the juvenile justice system, integrating Native history, culture, and languages into education for our children, and to also recognize and treat the historical trauma that continues to injure our youth and our nations. Similarly, we support passage of the Native Children's Commission Implementation Act because our youth are significantly overrepresented in the federal justice system. We urgently need help for our children to avoid such incarcerations, which often expose them to drug dealers and other serious offenders. A Tribal Juvenile Justice Advisory Commission could help gather resources from DOJ and other agencies to address juvenile justice needs. And it could help fund and develop programs like Tiwahe to reduce foster care placements and Native youth incarcerations. MMIP continues to be a scourge for us at Spirit Lake. We are very thankful for the passage of Savannah's Act. Savannah Graywin was our tribal member who grew up at Spirit Lake. Savannah was murdered, had her baby torn from her body, and thrown into a river like she didn't matter. But we honor her memory with our annual Savannah Graywin Day at home. Tragically, we continue to have MMIP cases such as Gemini Posey, who's still missing, Isaac Hunt, who was missing for a year and about 10 months and who has recently been, his remains have recently been found. Mr. Graybear, who was found and recovered in Arizona. These cases underscore the need to work across jurisdictional lines to protect our women, children, and men. We therefore propose a model law enforcement cooperation agreement with our neighbors so that when we have a missing person, our U.S. attorney will help coordinate search and rescue efforts. This is the best chance of rescue for our people within the first 72 hours of them going missing. So today we stand ready to develop this initiative, which could be a model framework to help other tribes. In addition, we need more funding for law enforcement needs on Indian reservations under federal and tribal criminal law enforcement jurisdiction. Congress should increase funding for OJS and Interior from $580 million in fiscal year 26 to $950 million in fiscal year 27. We also call for the passage of an Indian Country Violent Crime Fighting Act with the Interior Secretary and U.S. Attorney General as co-chairs alongside of tribal leaders across Indian Country, basically codifying the Lady Justice Task Force. To back up this effort, we need major DOJ block grants, 638 contracts and compacts funding, and joint BIA-DOJ funding for annual tribal master law enforcement plans. To protect Native peoples, Congress should also require Homeland Security, ICE agents, to receive training to work with Indian tribes, including education on the rights of tribes to issue tribal IDs. Congress should also establish an Interior BIA program to support Public Law 102477 framework and should fund much-needed tribal government law enforcement training, staffing, equipment, and facilities from DHS appropriations. In closing, our Tiwahe program, the passage of the Native Children's Commission Implementation Act, as well as our other recommendations, are essential to save the generations of our youth in Indian Country. As Sitting Bull once said, if we can put our hearts and minds together, we can make a better life for our children. With that, thank you for my opportunity to testify.
Thank you, Chairwoman. We will next turn to Councilmember Johnson. Welcome.
Good afternoon, Chairman Mikowski and members of the committee. My Indian name is Beipa Anita, Red Thunderbird Woman. My English name is Joan Johnson. I am honored to represent the Fort Belknap Indian community, home of the Dakota and Ani people. We are here today to join the 22 Tiwahe pilot demonstration and incubator tribes in expressing our strong support for the Native Children's Commission Implementation Act of 2025. On August 12, 2025, our community joined a collective of Tiwahe tribes in a formal letter to this committee urging the permanent authorization of the Tiwahe Initiative. For Fort Belknap, Tiwahe is not just a line item in a budget, it's the cornerstone of our success in protecting our most sacred resources, which are our children. Our reservation is remote, sitting just 35 miles from the Canadian border. In such isolation, the flexibility of the Tiwahe model is a necessity. It allows us to move away from one-size-fits-all federal mandates and toward a whole response that integrates our culture, traditions, and spirituality into every service we provide. The proof of the Tiwahe model is found in our results. Before Tiwahe, we lacked the resources to support youth struggling with trauma or substance abuse addictions. Today, our Soaring Eagle Juvenile Justice Program is a national model. By replacing punishment with cultural immersion led by our elders, we have reduced our 6-month recidivism rate to 35%, well below the national average. Our family wellness program has removed the stigma of intervention by meeting families in their homes as wellness specialists. We help them clear the Pacific hurdles to independence, from obtaining tribal IDs to accessing life-saving health care through our Tuahe transit system. We now facilitate over 100 vital transports per month. To understand why making this program permanent is so vital, you must hear the voices of those it serves. One of our participants who once struggled with addiction and homelessness recently shared, "Tuahe gave me the nudge I needed. They guided me to become closer to my Creator and helped me learn who I am. Today I am sober, happy, and enjoying motherhood." She just recently had twins. As we discussed the future of Native children, we must confront the harrowing reality. Section 202 of this act correctly identifies the need for formal study on the status of missing American Indian and Alaskan Native children. However, for this data to be truly effective, it must account for the full scope of the crisis, including non-custodial familial abductions. In Indian country, children's safety is often complicated by jurisdictional gaps and lack of their boots on the ground. While national attention often focuses on stranger danger, we know that family abductions where a child is taken are concealed in the violation of a custody order account for a massive portion of missing children cases. For our remote communities, these incidents are not just private family matters. They are emergencies that require coordination between law enforcement and families like Soaring Eagle. A lot of time in the justice system, because there are custodial issues between the parents, the child's voice gets lost, and a guardian ad litem steps in to be that voice for that child, so that child's voice isn't lost. However, coordination is only possible if the officers actually exist. True sovereignty is impossible without the resources to protect it. Currently, the federal government provides Fort Belknap with funding for only 9 law enforcement officers to patrol an area the size of Rhode Island. In 1997, the federal government provided our community $1.2 million for law enforcement. Nearly 30 years later, that figure has only increased to $1.3 million. This is not a budget, it is a forced state of emergency. We cannot protect our children with a department that is funded at a fraction of its actual need. For the Native Children's Commission Implementation Act to succeed, it must be paired with the full mandatory funding for tribal law enforcement. We urge the committee to move away from the historical funding models that keep our departments understaffed and underpaid. A lot of times we always look at law enforcement for keeping our community and our people safe. But what about the law enforcement? At the end of the day, they have to go home safe to their families too. And with one on patrol, that kind of makes the risk higher. While various transportation modes exist within the region, the Tuahe Transportation Initiative serves as a critical last-minute solution for the Fort Belknap Indian community. By strategically coordinating tribal resources, we have successfully bridged the geographic divide that historically isolates our most vulnerable members. The Fort Belknap Indian community is proof that when tribes are given flexibility to lead, our families thrive. However, as noted in our joint letter, for tribes to fully realize the potential of this initiative, an increase in authorized funding will be necessary to meet the vast needs across Indian country. We urge you to pass the Native Children's Commission Implementation Act of 2025. Help us ensure that the decade of action and healing become a permanent reality for our children. Chairman, we love our children on the reservation. Our children are going to grow up someday. We want them to heal. It doesn't matter who they are, where they come from, or what they've done. They still deserve to heal and live a good life. We would like them to have dreams, their dreams come true, and have stories to tell their children and their grandchildren someday. Not stories of unhealthy things, but stories of growth and stories of how they survived and what healing is really about. and because it certainly isn't about drugs or alcohol or anything unhealthy. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your testimony, Councilwoman. We will next hear virtually from Ms. Anita Fineday, who was one of our commissioners on the Alice Spotted Bear and Walter Soboleff Commission.
Thank you to the Commission. I want to thank the members of the committee for continuing to raise the issues of Native children and providing opportunities such as these to improve outcomes for Native children and Native communities. I was honored to serve on the commission, and I would just say that I served as chief judge for my tribe, for the White Earth Tribal Nation in Northwest Minnesota for 14 years. I have worked as an attorney and tribal judge on focusing on children's issues, child welfare, and also developing tribal court systems. I was honored to serve on this commission on Native children and serve as one of 11 members. I just want to say a word about our work, and that we gathered baseline data on topics including juvenile justice, socioeconomic issues, mental health, suicide, infant and child mortality, child welfare, substance use, ACEs, or adverse childhood experiences, educational achievement, physical health, and we held hearings both in person and during COVID virtually. We heard from elected officials, community leaders. We had 26 site visits and 10 regional hearings, as well as 25 virtual hearings. We heard from experts in their fields, and we heard from scholars who had worked in each of these areas throughout their careers. I want to focus on one of our recommendations, and out of many. My background, as I said, is working in tribal courts, and I want to talk about 4E funding, which is comes from the Children's Bureau, which is part of ACF, and we talked during hearings about the potential of having 4E funding made more readily available for tribes. 4E funding is accessed by all 50 states. It funds child welfare in this country, but currently only 14 tribes receive 4E funding. And the reason only 14 tribes receive this funding is because of the huge burden of administering the program. This is a huge obstacle for many tribes. The reporting requirements and the data requirements are very burdensome. So we proposed that 4E funding, which is an already existing funding source. It is already accessed, as I said, by all 50 states. So it's not new funding, it's something that already exists. So taking 4E funding and then also using 4B funding, which more tribes do access 4B funding now, but not all tribes do. And again, because of the burdensome reporting requirements, especially for small tribes. And so the one of the recommendations is to combine 4E and 4B funding with 477 programs. So we've heard 477 programs mentioned a couple of times, and that is a way to make federal funding streams more readily accessible for tribes, to provide flexibility and to allow tribes to come up with one funding agreement that covers all of the different funding streams that are included in that agreement. So we would propose that the committee consider that recommendation as a way to fund child welfare for tribes also to fund tribal courts through that funding stream, and to allow tribes to access that funding through the 477 programs that already exist. And I will stop there and wait for more questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that and that very specific suggestion. Appreciate that. Next, we will turn to Lori Jump. Welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My spirit name is Anishinaabe Kwetanaki, and my given name is Lori Jump. I'm a citizen of the Sault Ste. Marie tribe of Chippewa Indians and a survivor of both domestic and sexual violence. I've been an advocate for survivors for almost 40 years, and I come here today as the executive officer for StrongHearts Native Helpline. Miigwech, thank you for this opportunity to provide testimony on Title II, Justice and Safety for Native Children. Title II offers a number of provisions that will have a positive impact on access to justice and healing for American Indian, Alaska Native, and Native Hawaiian peoples. While all of the provisions are important, I will focus my remarks on Section 204, which will have the most impact on the work that we do at StrongHearts. Indian country has the highest rates of violence across our country, and yet our relatives have the least access to services intended to respond to that violence. There are 575 federally recognized tribes in the United States, but less than half of them have funding to provide the life-saving services that so many of our relatives need. In our StrongHearts directory of Native-centered resources, we have 274 domestic violence programs and 67 domestic violence shelters. Remember, there are 575 tribal nations, so that number is woefully, it doesn't meet the need. Section 2 of the proposed legislation will codify several important provisions that are currently funded through discretionary appropriations. These include the Alaska Native Women's Resource Center, the Native Hawaiian Women's Resource Center, and StrongHearts Native Helpline. Indigenous people have a different worldview that is often misunderstood by Western organizations. Where others may say they have rights, we say that we have obligations. And where others may say that I don't know that person, we say that they are a relative. And as a relative, we have an obligation to care for them. And that worldview, I think, is precisely why this legislation is so important to us. The services provided by the three organizations that I mentioned help to ensure that survivors have access to services that meet their needs. The resource centers and the tribal coalitions all provide incredibly important training and technical assistance to tribal nations, to tribal programs, and tribal communities. This training ensures that programs developed are victim-centered, trauma-informed, and empowerment-based. StrongHearts is a national, anonymous, and confidential helpline for our relatives. For those communities that do not have domestic violence services, we can fill that gap, giving all of our relatives, no matter where they are or what time of day or night, access to peer support, safety planning, and warm handoffs to services for ongoing support. In just under 9 years of operation, we have received more than 80,000 contacts and made more than 32,000 referrals to other organizations for ongoing support. In the early years, when StrongHearts had limited hours of operations, we used a recording that allowed callers to transfer to the National Domestic Violence Hotline simply by pressing 1 to ensure that no call went unanswered. Less than 10% of callers chose to use the transfer option. And to me, this speaks to the desire for culturally honoring services that our relatives are seeking and deserve. The proposed legislation will ensure that we can continue to do this work on behalf of and with our relatives. In closing, I'd like to thank you all and express my genuine gratitude to the committee for considering my testimony. I'd like to conclude by reminding our federal partners of the significance of codifying the critical support to tribes and tribal organizations. It shows an investment in our communities, promoting solutions that come from our strengths, our culture, and our collective knowledge. That investment advances safer, healthier communities where access to not only justice, but access to healing is achievable, and where Native individuals, families, and communities can not only survive, but thrive. Miigwech.
Thank you so much, Ms. Jump. And our final contributor to the panel this morning is Mr. Mark Patterson. I guess it's afternoon, but it's morning there in Hawaii still. So, Mr. Patterson, welcome.
To share Hawaii's story. I think I've just been unmuted. Good morning, everyone. Chair and Vice Chair, thank you for the invitation to be here this morning. Thank you, Vice Chair, for your introduction. I must be transparent and honest to say that there is no one person that has caused all these changes in Hawaii, but a collaboration of agencies, community leaders to bring about the change that has occurred. And so, but I thank you for that warm introduction. In 2022, I was honored to be appointed by this committee to be a practitioner on the Coordinated Council of the Office of Juvenile Justice. And that was a real honor for me and a real learning experience where I seen all the federal agencies that were part of the council and the budgets they had for Native communities or the Native Americans and Native Alaskans and Native Hawaiians. And what was amazing to me that most of them or all of them were working in silos. And it was an interesting point for me in trying to figure out how do we get the Coordinated Council at that time to create a more coordinated effort on their funding to improve the systems or the justice systems or family plights on the reservations and in Alaska, etc. And it was a great experience for me. However, the Coordinated Council has not met since 2024, but our report is online to the Congress that some of our recommendations can be seen. I share this with you because for generations, Native Hawaiian families have carried the weight of historical trauma, systemic inequities, and the erosion of traditional structures that once protected our children. Yet despite these challenges, our communities have never lost the belief that healing begins with culture, with family, and with the deep relationships that bind us to one another and to our ancestral lands. That belief has guided Hawaii's justice reforms for more than 2 decades, and it is why our state is now recognized nationally for what culturally grounded, trauma-informed care and land-based education can achieve. A major reason for this progress is the growing presence of Native Hawaiians in leadership roles and on the front lines of state agencies and community organizations. When our own people are shaping decisions and directly serving our families, our cultural values, and our methods of healing move faster with greater integrity and with deeper impact. Nationally, we often describe restorative justice as a reform, but for Indigenous people, Native American nations, Alaska Native communities, Native Hawaiians, it is a continuation of practices that have sustained families for generations. What we now call restorative justice reflects the same values at the heart of the Tauahi Initiative, strengthening families, restoring cultural identity, and empowering communities to design their own pathways to healings. Tauahi's approach of braiding federal resources, elevating Indigenous governance, and restoring cultural identity creates the conditions for these models to thrive. When we invest in Hawaii, we invest in justice systems that heal rather than harm and that honor the cultural wisdom and sovereignty of the communities they serve. Restorative justice in America is strongest when it stands on the foundation Indigenous peoples have built. Across the country, specialty courts have shown that we address the real drivers of system involvement: addiction, trauma, mental illness, family instability, and cultural disconnection. People heal and communities become safer. Hawaii has demonstrated this for more than a decade. Girls court and juvenile drug court provided that when Native Hawaiian youth are supported with cultural mentors, family engagements, a restorative model that we call ho'oponopono, incarceration drops and identity is restored. Our adult drug court, mental health court, and women's court extend this healing across generations. Native Hawaiian women remain among the most overrepresented and least visible in our systems, which makes this work urgent. Hawaii cultural-based courses are the next step. They formalize what already works by rooting justice in culture, ohana, and healing. This direction aligns with the Tauahi Initiative and with the federal trust responsibility to support the well-being and cultural survival of Indigenous people. Hawaii cultural-based courts offer a proven, culturally grounded model that strengthens families and reduces incarceration. And even with our local successes, Native Hawaiian women and children still face structural barriers that no state innovation can fix. The most significant is the lack of consistent, accurate federal data. Unlike tribal nations, Native Hawaiians are excluded from ICWA, the Indian Child Welfare Act. There is no federal oversight, no mandatory reporting, and no inclusion in National ICWA database or sets. As a result, Native Hawaiian children, one of the largest indigenous populations in the country, remain invisible in the very systems meant to protect indigenous families. This is why Titles 2 and 3 of the bill are so critical. They correct decades of erasure by ensuring Native American, Alaskan Native, and Native Hawaiian children are accurately counted and that research on Native families is culturally grounded and actionable. Section 304 is equally essential. It directs a federal study on tribal capacity, and Native Hawaiian organization must be explicitly included. Our cultural practitioners delivering land-based healing, ho'oponopono, and family-centered interventions, yet they are often shut out of federal resources because of administrative barriers. This work aligns with the Tauahi Initiative, which strengthens family systems, restores cultural identity, and empowers indigenous communities to lead. Title 2 and 3 make indigenous families visible. Section 304 ensures indigenous organizations are supported, and Tauahi provides a framework for indigenous communities, including Native Hawaiians, to thrive. Together, these provisions create the conditions for indigenous families to thrive on their own terms. Without explicit inclusion of Native Hawaiians in Section 3 and 4, we risk repeating the very patterns of exclusion this bill seeks to correct. With that inclusion, we take a meaningful step toward justice, equity, and the restoration of indigenous well-being. Hawaiian experience shows that when indigenous communities lead with culture, family, and healing, outcomes improve and system involvement declines. Including Native Hawaiians in Tauahi will not only strengthen our families, it will provide a proven model that can uplift tribal communities nationwide. Thank you. I'll be around for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Patterson, and thank all of you for your testimony here today. As I listen to the comments that you have made, it just reinforces to me why we set out on this commission in the first place, to really focus in on what more we can be doing when it comes to the health and well-being of Native children, and a recognition that there is no one thing. We just can't focus on education. We just can't focus on safety. We just can't focus on housing. It has got to be comprehensive. It has to be holistic. It has to acknowledge the emphasis on culture and identity, and how that is so central to healing for children and for youth and for the families in your communities. And I think each one of you has echoed that in different areas of social services and the justice programs. I had mentioned the Tauahi program in my comments, and both Chairwoman Street and Councilwoman Johnson, you both have acknowledged that. Mr. Patterson has acknowledged the Tauahi. But you have been part of the initial pilot, if you will, with the Tawahi program. So you've seen how the more traditional federal programs have worked, and now how with Tawahi you have greater coordination across services, integrating the culture and the language and the traditional practices. You've spoken to the benefits of what we have with Tawahi. How, in your words, and I think you've given us a sense as to the priority of it, but if we are able to expand on Tawahi, so that others may follow this as a model, what would be some of your recommendations, and why do we need to reinforce that this approach is better than what we have seen traditionally, or perhaps more historically with the traditional federal programs? And I'll throw that out to either one of you.
I guess what makes Tawahi so extraordinary in our community is because of the flexibility. I've been working with youth for 24 years. I've been under other grants that have a more stricter policy and doing guidelines and doing what we can do and what we can't do. Tawahi actually, we're able to work with flexibility. We're able to work with our children the way we know will heal them. And that's our culture, our spirituality. A lot of our children that come to us don't have that don't know or have an identity. They don't know where they come from. You know, yes, they know that they're Native American, but what is their family tree? You know, what are their traditions and culture? You know, so we introduced them to the Sweat Lodge. We introduced them to prayer, to language. We introduced them to our culture and our traditions that our people have been living for a long time. We're very fortunate to have spiritual leaders in every aspect of our Tawahi, whether it's from the juvenile justice that we do to the family wellness, has a cultural component in it, a holistic healing component where we want our children to heal. And I know I'm living proof that it was the holistic healing in our traditional ceremonies that have saved me. And I believe strongly in what we do to heal our children.
So you've spoken to some of the more cultural, historical culture aspects of it, and yet Chairwoman Street, I understand that all of Spirit Lake's social service program staff have either a bachelor's or a master's degree in social work, and that Tawahi has helped make that possible. You that's clearly an investment in workforce capacity. Can you speak to that aspect of it?
Yes, absolutely. So through the Tawahi and related initiatives, the tribe increased staffing capacity to 16 full-time positions. They're serving a population of more than 2,400 children within our boundaries. The program is made up of entirely enrolled members. The majority are from the Spirit Lake area, our own people that have been educated and are serving our own communities. This expansion has allowed tribal social services to safely manage foster care, CPS, and prevention caseloads, which improve oversight, documentation, and accountability. And equally important, the Tawahi supported the education, like you're mentioning, of the professional advancement of the tribal workforce. And as a result of that, we have 2 staff members who now hold Master of Social Work degrees, 8 staff members who hold Bachelor of Science in Social Work degrees, and 6 staff members who hold Associate of Arts in Social Work degrees. So for us, this represents a significant transformation in workforce qualifications, and it reflects the tribe's commitment to build a highly trained, credentialed child welfare workforce rooted in the Spirit Lake community.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let me turn to Senator Schatz.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the testifiers, and not just for your testimony, but for your incredibly important work. Of course, I'm going to start with Mr. Patterson. As you know, in the early 2000s, Hawaii began to transform the criminal justice system by embracing restorative justice and incorporating traditional Hawaiian practices. How did this shift improve the juvenile justice system in the state to reduce recidivism among Native Hawaiians?
Thank you, Senator. That's a really good question and a complex question in itself. And for everyone who's present, you have to understand that, Native Hawaiian, we are in and among the community in the state of Hawaii. We're not apart. Yeah. And so, though we are the highest in the criminal justice system, there came a point from the perspective of our family court where the judges took the leadership and basically said, we are no longer going to put children in prison. We're not going to put children in prison. And so once the judges made that announcement, they needed to figure out how they were going to do that. And so that's when the Office of Youth Service stepped up and began to create the collaborative leadership that needed to bring state agencies together with their community service providers and start looking at things that they wanted to see that included trauma-informed care, restorative justice methods, and cultural programming. A lot of that was already going on among the community organizations. But now that you have the state organizations or agencies wanting to go in that directions, it was just a matter of bringing them all together and creating a continuum of care throughout our state systems involving cultural programs at every level, from the Department of Education to the child welfare system to the Department of Health and all the mental health issues in their families and children, bringing them together so that they can have and identify all the issues along and provide with their service providers the cultural program that is necessary. This was pretty profound and innovative at the time 15 years ago, but they said, let's do it, let's do this, let's try it. And basically what we did is we gave the judges tools in their decision making to say, okay, we're not going to send you here, we're going to send you there, right? To build a diversion with these programs to help identify the needs of not just the juvenile offender, but the needs of the family, yeah? And threw it back into those communities in order for them to restore and resolve the issue. So we went from punitive consequences to non-punitive consequences. They did not have consequences for their crimes, but they were just given non-punitive consequences where they had to have actionable things to do back in their communities so that they can improve on their behavior. And that was the real success in lowering the incarceration of the Native Hawaiian population and the overall population as well. I think even as of today, on a population of 1.5 million, the Hawaii Youth Correctional Facility houses 20 youth at this time.
That's incredible. Mr.
4 or
Patterson,
5 probably be girls. Yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, the final question I have for you is just if you could talk to me about how the specialty courts, including women and girls courts, have sort of been essential to getting these good outcomes. It seems to me that without these specialty courts, it would be a little more difficult to deal with these things as a kind of public health problem, as a family and a community problem, and not, narrowly as a criminal justice question. Just talk to me about the roles of those specialty courts.
The most successful of our specialty courts, of course, family court as a whole. And within family court, you have another court that has grown nationally, given national attention. This is our girls' court. Yeah, they've demonstrated that we can create specialized, culturally grounded courts designed specifically for justice-involved girls and runaway youth. We can keep Native kids out of incarceration entirely. These programs work because they are built on 3 core principles. Yeah, culture is central. Yeah. When young people reconnect to identity, language, place, and community, they stabilize. Culture becomes the protective factor that keeps them safe. Second, healing and accountability happen together. A specialized juvenile court brings judges, clinicians, educators, cultural practitioners, and peer mentors into one coordinated team. Instead of pushing youth deeper into the system, the courts wraps around them and their families with structure, support, and clear expectations. And third, we measure success by long-term stability, school engagement, family reconnection, cultural participation, and wellness, not by how many sanctions we impose. Yeah, those are the three things that are especially used in creating our courts and being successful, Senate.
Thank you very much. And I'll just add the one amendment that I wanted to flag. I know I'm going to get a yes from the testifier, so I'll just, in the interest of time, just flag it. There is a really good idea for a hotline. And I think for both cultural reasons and time zone reasons, we're going to need to specify that Hawaii may need its own hotline. Thank you.
Well, Alaska and Hawaii.
Alaska and Hawaii, yes. Excuse me. Yeah, and we're cousins, yes.
Registered, thank you. Senator Daines.
Chair Mikowski, thank you. Again, I want to welcome Councilwoman Joan Johnson from Harlem, Montana. Thanks again for coming before this committee. I certainly appreciate the opportunity to have a discussion to talk public safety for our Native communities, particularly Native youth. I applaud the Trump administration's immediate actions to close the southern border and dispatch law enforcement personnel to Indian country. And the opening of that new FBI field office in Billings bodes well for future cooperation between our state, tribal, and federal partners to address violent crime on reservations. I'm really glad to have our U.S. Attorney Kurt Almy there in Billings, who I know is passionate on this issue. With more law enforcement resources certainly needed, there's still more, of course, that needs to be done to address public safety than just arrests and drug interdictions. Councilwoman Johnson, the Fort Belknap Indian community were amongst the first tribes in the country to participate in the Tawani Initiative. Through this pilot program, the tribe received funding to strengthen and integrate services to better serve young people on the reservation, as you mentioned, also to help the parents. You're also addressing the youth, but also the parents to break, as you say, some of the generational trauma that's passed on. My question for you is, could you explain briefly the biggest impacts you've seen since implementing the Tawani framework?
Well, I have to answer. I guess I'd have to answer that in a spiritual way. We helping them find their culture, their identity, and knowing who they are, and like receiving a native name, understanding the language. And when they first started, a lot of our clients, they didn't even know where they came from. So the 6 elders that come on board with Tuahe that have been with us since the beginning, they taught them about our culture and traditional.
Thank you. You mentioned about the results, the efficacy of the program we met this morning. In the first 4 years of the program, the Fort Belknap saw decreases in child abuse cases, family assaults, and elder abuse cases. The juvenile recidivism rate decreased, I believe you told me, from 80% to 35%, and the number of program participants increased. Has the Fort Belknap tribe been able to sustain that success over the last 4 years?
Yes, we have. Through our culturally infused alternative sentencing, meaning that they are with their culture, teaching these kids who they are so they grow up with identity, simply like having a native name, learning the language, learning about ceremonies like Sundance, fasting, circles, knowing their self-worth, knowing they are worthy and loved. And a lot of these kids never thought they were. Teaching parents how to be supportive of their children. As I stated earlier in our conversation, that not only do we work with the youth, the parents kind of fell in where we're kind of teaching the parents how to be a role model, how to support their child, and how to love them, not only emotionally, but physically too. When these kids learn to love themselves, they stop recidivism because they're, like I said, when they come in, there's no identity. They feel abandoned. They have anger issues. Some of them come in with addiction. And so And these kids want to go to school. They don't want to go to school hungry. They don't want to go to school and be bullied because of the lifestyle that they live. They just want to go to school and get an education and have a better life. And they want their parents to love them and support them. You know, a lot of these kids will always love their parents no matter what, but they want that support and that love from their parents. They want to feel safe and protected. So that's what our elders provide them with, the understanding what true self-love is, you know, teaching them the core values of being respectful. And and our clients become role models themselves to the new clients that come in, the younger ones. You know, they take them kind of under their arm, trying to guide them in the way the elders guided them. And we do a lot of follow-ups, 3 months, 6 months, 9 months. Even after they turn 18, our case manager goes out and still does the follow-up, because I think follow-ups are very important when you have, when you work with children, youth at a young age, to know that there's somebody out there that believes in them. And Fort Belknap has the highest rate of follow-ups that are being done.
Councilwoman Johnson, thank you. It's a long ways from Harlem, Montana to Washington, D.C. Thanks for making the long journey and for your testimony.
Thank you. I too want to thank all of you for testifying today, whether you flew out here or you're participating remotely. I think it is just so important to hear your voices. I also have to thank the chairwoman and our former colleague, Heidi Heidkamp, for the creation of the commission and continued work in this space, which is so important. I want to direct my first question to Ms. Fineday. I know she is participating remotely. If she can hear me, I hope she can. I would love to talk to you a little bit about some of the work that you did on the commission, and specifically not just the Alice Spotted Bear Commission, but there was also a field hearing for the Not Invisible Act Commission, and there was a report that came out from that as well. Both commissions and their reports were consistent in one thing. Well, there were a number of things, but one I want to talk about, which is this overarching topic that there's a lack of information sharing and coordination between non-tribal and tribal governments. And specifically, this is my concern, and a number of us have been talking about this. Here's an example. Many social media and tech companies don't even honor warrants for electronic evidence issued by tribal courts, but they do if you're a non-tribal court. As we all know, anybody who works in law enforcement, when there's a delay in getting the evidence, it really is a delay to access to justice and preventing justice, and particularly in our tribal communities. I'm wondering, Ms. Fineday, if you can touch a little bit more about the concerns about this lack of information sharing and some of the recommendations in the report, if you can hear me.
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you for that question. That's something that came up frequently in my work as a tribal judge. And you can imagine working on the White Earth Indian Reservation in northwest Minnesota in a very rural area, sparsely populated. And when law enforcement was not in communication, when our tribal law enforcement often did not have the ability to access the same information streams that county and state law enforcement agencies accessed. So it could be state-generated information, or it could have been and could still be today federally generated information. And this could be something as simple as trying to locate a person and or having a missing person or a missing child. I think Minnesota has done a good job of integrating those systems in Minnesota, but I don't think that is the case nationally. And one of the things that we brought up in the state of Minnesota was we have Amber Alerts when there is a missing child, but the Amber Alerts did not include tribal children because the tribes' systems didn't talk to the state systems. Their databases weren't connected, and they didn't have a mechanism for sharing that kind of information. So that's kind of an extreme example, but it takes work, and and then every state is different. Right. Every state has its own way of handling citations or so agreements to share that information need to be hammered out between each state and each tribe, and it can lead to. I had a situation where a mother was deceased, and the father took the child to a state court and got custody of that child. He had a birth certificate and mom was deceased, but he had a number of criminal charges against him regarding that child, but the state was not aware of that because it was in a tribal system. Yeah. So yes, that arises many times and takes a lot of work and effort and communication on building partnerships with our local law enforcement agencies to be able to share information and work out a way that information is routinely shared.
Thank you. I know my time is up. I'm going to take the same opportunity as ranking member.
Thank you.
Excuse me. I know my time is up. I'm going to take the same opportunity as the ranking member just to say there's legislation at the federal level we're looking to address that. One is the Tribal Access to Electronic Evidence Act for the very reasons that we just heard. There's another piece of legislation that addresses the importance of finding missing children. And one thing I know is the U.S. Marshal Service that actually works with local and state law enforcement to track down fugitives and missing children is not allowed to work with our tribal communities. We need to fix that. There's another piece of legislation to do that. So I thank you, Chairwoman.
Strong suggestions. Thank you for that, Senator Cortez Masto. Senator Hoeven.
Thanks, Chairman Murkowski. And thanks to all the witnesses for being here and for those testifying remotely as well. And in particular, I want to thank Chairman Lonna Jackson-Street for being here, Chairman of Spirit Lake Nation. Thank you for making the trip. And I know you had some trouble with your airline reservations, and certainly the Chairman and I know what that's like, as well as Member Cortez Masto. So thanks for hanging in there and joining us today. And thanks for your strong leadership of Spirit Lake Nation, not only as chairman, but I think, 8 years as secretary treasurer for the tribal council. So, and serving on so many committees and doing so much good work for the tribe. We appreciate you. I want to start out in regard to the missing and murdered unit, MMU, at Department of Interior, which is so important for investigating missing people in Indian country. Has this unit supported Spirit Lake and your efforts? And if so, how? Could you kind of tell us how they're doing, and maybe also what they can do to, improve or increase their support for your efforts?
Thank you for the question, Senator Hoeven. I really appreciate your support, on this effort. Spirit Lake's been a strong advocate as far as MMIP. I also serve on the committee for the state of North Dakota for the MMIP task force. Recently, the state of North Dakota did pass and approve the MMIP task force for tribal nations within Indian country. And so Spirit Lake, is very familiar with the issues that we face with MMIP. When I talked earlier about our missing individuals, Gemini Posey, Isaac Hunt, Lyndon Graybear, just to name a few, Savannah Graywind, who we now have an act after. So Spirit Lake is, it's not unfamiliar territory for us. And we ourselves had faced, a lot of those challenges in working with, our partners now that we've been able to establish, MOUs with the state of North Dakota. And, Savannah's act, it was great and, provided that structure for us, and through that, we've been able to also develop our own incident task force within our own tribal community because we had faced so many missing persons within our tribe, and at the time, felt that the response wasn't, quick enough. And like I said earlier, 72 hours is pretty much the time you have, and it's crucial time. And so by being able to establish, what we have established at home, it just was reassurance for us that, we wouldn't have another missing person go missing and not be found. And so our goal is always to, rescue and not recover. Unfortunately, because of our lack of law enforcement, we recently had a young lady who had just turned 21 who did everything right in terms of calling 911 and notifying law enforcement that she was lost. However, because of the lack of resources, because of the lack of law enforcement that most of our tribal nations face, unfortunately, she had succumbed, to what had happened to her situation where she ended up drowning in the water. And it took about 6 days with relentless, support from outside agencies that came in through what we developed with our incident command team to come in and find her, recover her remains. Her name was Tiny White. She just turned 21 years old.
So one of the things that I've worked very hard on is the Advanced Training Center at Camp Grafton. And across the upper Midwest, we have a lot of BIA law enforcement officer positions that are vacant. And we need to have training closer to the northern part of the country. They can't all go down to New Mexico for their training. And that's why we have the Advanced Training Center there. And we need to continue to build on that. We're getting a lot of good response. A lot of people coming. The numbers are in the thousands now that come. It's very impressive. And so we need that basic training there as well. Would you speak to how important it is, particularly with our very strong and able chairman here, who I know shares, and also, as last I checked, from a northern state as well, how important it is to support that Advanced Training Center for the law and get these law enforcement positions filled in the BIA for the northern states?
Thank you for that question, Senator Hoeven, and thank you for allowing me to address, Mr. Chairman, on this particular subject. It's very critical for Indian country to be supported in this effort to increase the capacity of law enforcement officers back into our communities to handle such cases as the one I had just talked about involving one of our tribal members, Tiny White, where if we had the adequate number of law enforcement officers on duty on any given time, their quicker response could have made the difference in her life. So specifically for Spirit Lake, we have about 250,000 acres of land, and we're considered a large land base, not comparable to other tribes within our state that are much larger. But I think we all face the same amount of, struggles when it comes to lacking those resources for our communities. And so your support on increasing that funding, your support on supporting the Camp Grafton base, for law enforcement training center, not just for advanced training, but for entry-level police officers would be very supportive. A lot of, I think, our tribal nations have the capability to provide that workforce plan into their communities, provided we have the training center in North Dakota. I know we do. Devils Lake does have a peace officer training program, but we do have the capacity with our tribal colleges to do the same.
Well, and the reservation, of course, is co-located with our National Guard Army base, Camp Grafton, that is right there, and with Lake Region College, which also trains state law enforcement, highway patrol. So there's already tremendous resources there that can be leveraged in place. So it's a real benefit for the federal government to do it there because of the facilities we have that can be used for both training in Indian country as well as off reservation. Correct?
Absolutely. So we've done the work, we've done the legwork, we've made the connections, and we've established the MOUs with our local resources, with our highway patrol, with our county offices, and we just need, the funding to be able to carry out, those plans for how we want to police our tribal nations in Indian country. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. And know that your good senator is always a good, strong advocate for this, for all the right reasons, as you have pointed out, in terms of kind of the dual-use infrastructure and the training. There is a very clear recognition that throughout Indian country, certainly in my state of Alaska, the lack of law enforcement presence, whether it is at state trooper level or tribal police officer, I think we recognize that there are far, far, far too many communities that are either unserved or underserved.
And huge distances. Right?
Huge distances, and many, many challenges as we understand. I just have a couple more questions for our witnesses this afternoon, and I want to go back online to you, Ms. Fineday, because you raised the issue of 4B and the 477 agreements. I have long been a supporter of 477s that really allow for a much better coordination of services. But we're seeing that our federal agencies are increasingly limiting access to 477, particularly at Interior. But I think what you said, I think you said burden in administering 4Bs. Can you just speak a little bit more to the committee here about why strengthening 477s through the cross-departmental coordination is really key, and giving it that flexibility that allows us to better address the child welfare challenges that we see across Indian country?
Yes, I would just say, so I'm sure you know this better than I do. 477, it started in 2000, in the year 2000, and it allows tribes and tribal organizations more flexibility in funding. And then it was expanded in 2017 to include 12 departments and that became eligible to be included in these 477 programs. And the BIA is the lead agency in developing these 477 plans. And there are currently 67 tribal plans, 477 plans in 18 states. And what 477 does is it reduces paperwork, it consolidates services, it focuses on client needs, and it uses existing funding more efficiently. So it's taking programs that are operated, and I don't have the names of the federal agencies in front of me right now, but the Children's Bureau and ACF is currently not one of the programs that participates in 477. So in expanding 477 to include the Children's Bureau or ACF would could possibly allow tribes to access 4E funding and 4B funding through a 477 plan. And you could combine that into the 477, and it would transform tribal child welfare, I believe, and it would also form a component for family stability and would support cross-training and could just really transform the services that are available in Indian country, because most tribes are not able to access that funding at all today.
Thank you for that. I want to direct a question to you, Ms. Jump, and this is about FIPSA and the importance of reauthorizing that. They're still getting appropriations, but it has not been reauthorized since 2015, and it lacks the statutory authorization for tribal and culturally specific services. So that's one of the reasons why we've included these provisions in our discussion draft. Can you speak a little bit more about why it is important that we have clear authorization for tribes and culturally specific programs? I mean, I think there's no dispute about the need that our children have for these services that are more culturally connected as they're facing their trauma. But we've been there. You have some who say, well, you have money that is still being directed to FIPSA, so the reauthorization is perhaps not as key to that. But can you address that piece of it? Because that's another piece to this bigger puzzle that we've been trying to put together.
Yes. So.
Wait. No, I'm sorry, Ms. Fineday. I had directed this to Ms. Jump.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Okay, sorry about that.
That was confusing. I thought you were talking and I didn't see your mouth moving. It's pretty amazing.
I was stirring my voice.
Yeah.
Actually, as you know, FIPSA is the major funding source for domestic violence shelters, tribal or state coalitions, and national resource centers. For the past 40 years, they've been doing that work. And it was last authorized, as you mentioned, in 2010. And so it's been expired now for 10 years. Advocates have been working on reauthorization without success, which is probably the biggest reason why I'm so excited about this proposed legislation. You know, as you said, Congress has continued to provide funding, but without authorization, the funding really is at risk. As you know, just last year, the Unauthorized Spending Accountability Act was introduced, which would have reduced appropriations for unauthorized programs over a 3-year period, resulting in eventual termination. Advocates across this country were terrified, not just in Indian country, but across the country, because this funding provides such critical services, right? Shelters, when somebody is seeking safety, and they're so far and few.
There were 65 shelters
There's
total?
No. So across the country, there are about, I believe it's 354 shelters. In Indian country, there are 67.
67 throughout.
67 throughout all of Indian country, serving 575 tribal nations. And so, you know, we were terrified, right? And everybody was holding their breath until, you know, we found out that, okay, yes, we were going to maintain some funding. And, you know, that feeling is not new across Indian country, right? I think that's one of our biggest risk about programming is that, you know, funding will come out and we'll be able to establish programs and then funding goes away and we lose them. And so there's always a risk of programming that is not authorized of being cut. And that's just, you know, tribes are already underfunded and under-resourced. So our communities know that as sparse as these services are, that funding is critical. Further, I think that what really is important about, you know, reauthorization is that it reflects a commitment, right, to survivors. It reflects a commitment to survivors that they are seen, they are heard, and that they matter. That we will continue to support these programs that are so critical, that are life-saving, and that commitment is important. For all of our survivors.
Thank you for reinforcing that. I wanted to ask you a final question, Councilwoman Johnson, and you spoke when you were talking about missing Native children. You also recommended that we ensure that this includes non-custodial family abductions. And I think you kind of underscored why that was important. But I guess I'd ask you to expand on why these contexts are significant to include in our legislation, why it's important to have the information from BIA and DOJ to help you to respond to the needs. I think sometimes we want to focus our legislation, but you've reminded us that oftentimes these non-custodial family matters require us to look more expansively at that definition.
Thank you for the question, Chairman Mikowski. Missing often involves complex family dynamics. When a child is taken by a non-custodial family member, it's sometimes dismissed as a family dispute rather than a disappearance. Including these cases ensures that the children don't fall through the cracks of the legal system. Regardless of who took the child, the result is the same. A child is missing from their safe environment. We cannot ignore the role of substance abuse in child safety. When drug activity is involved, the risk of the child increases dramatically. By tracking cases linked to drug activity, we can identify patterns and hotspots. This isn't about criminalizing families. It's about understanding the specific dangers like trafficking or neglect that our children face so we can intervene faster. Currently, information is often scattered. Having a unified study that coordinates with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children means we aren't starting from scratch every time a child goes missing. For a rural family like Fort Belknap, seconds matter. Real-time coordination data between federal agencies and NCMEC gives our local law enforcement the tools, alerts, and resources that they need. And a lot of times, like I said, when law enforcement responds to these calls, seconds matter. And if we're understaffed with law enforcement and they're at another major call, trying to prioritize which one's more important, and you only have one officer on, it makes a big difference in saving someone's life. Thank you.
Thank you. And I want to thank all of you. I know that that what we're developing has generated a lot of interest among colleagues here on the committee. We've seen that as we have engaged in the outreach, seeking input not only from members of Congress, but more importantly, out in Indian country, really trying to take the recommendations from the commission and put them into actionable items, actionable legislation, but trying to be most responsive in a way that acknowledges the cultural implications, what we want to do to build on best practices that have been developed, not because we in Washington have drafted something and said it's going to be this way, but because it has been more organically built, more responsively built, based on traditional practices and ways of knowing, ways of learning. And so we respect that, and we want to see that reflected in this legislation that we will ultimately introduce. So I think it's fair to say that you can anticipate more questions from colleagues. We'll hold the hearing record open for an additional 2 weeks. And before I close, I want to acknowledge not only those of you that have participated, but there's been an extraordinary amount of work that has been done by the staff of this committee. My team has been extraordinary in what they have done and in working with the ranking member and other members as we have tried to engage in field hearings, listening sessions, and really trying to build on what we hear from you. So I thank the teams for your work and all that you are doing. I know we've got a lot more to do before we move forward with it, but my hope is that with good input across the spectrum, from Republicans to Democrats to more rural areas to urban Indians, that we do develop legislation that is responsive to the need in a way that we are all proud of. So I thank you all, and with that, the committee stands adjourned. And we say happy birthday to Sam today, too.